I'm Mark Bouris, and this is Straight Talk.
Chris Joye, welcome back to Straight Talk, mate. A lot's happened since I last had you. Like you were here in March this year. And we were talking, this is sort of trade war announcement sort of period.
Pre-trade war announcement.
Pre-trade war. Yeah. Okay. So
it was pre-Liberation Day.
That's right. Pre-Liberation Day, so-called Liberation Day. So he announced, and you were predicting rate cuts, and we got a rate cut in May, RBA rate cut. And then we're probably going to get a rate cut again in July, but we'll come back to that in a second. If we just peel back though, because, with Trump, doing what he's doing, and with the world, the volatility is crazy, but sometimes we sort of tend to forget what has happened before. Like we just sort of concentrate on what's happening now, and we will talk about Israel, Iran. But if we could just go back to that March discussion, just remind us what you were saying in March, pre-trade war Trump.
Yeah, so I said I thought US equities would fall 20 to 40% and that it was going to be really bad. And then he was really serious on tariffs. And no one was prepared for this very hawkish Trump on tariffs. And then it was basically going to get pretty ugly. And what happened was the S&P 500 US equities fell 22%.
Post-Liberation Day?
Yep. And the NASDAQ index fell 27%. And that was through to 9 April. So 2 April was Liberation Day. And then Trump, being the increasingly consummate iterator, backflips on 9 April. He says, okay, I've scared the shit out of markets. I've kind of declared a forever trade war on everyone. I'm going to focus on China, but everyone else I'll do a deal with. So he's sticking true to his plan. He's decoupling from China. That's happening. He's going to bring all that manufacturing home. That's going to be super positive for US growth in the medium term. But he's doing trade deals with everybody. Markets loved it. The day he backflipped, the US equity market jumped 9.5%. We on that day bought $1.7 billion of bonds. And then
we being Coolabah?
Coolabah, yeah, the firm I run. We run $15 billion. And then from 9 April to 30 April, we bought $4.6 billion of bonds, and we thought – so we were super bearish in March.
You're buying Aussie bonds you're talking about?
Global bonds, yeah.
Global bonds.
Yeah, US banks, Aussie banks. But on the show last time, I was, the uber bear, but we flipped 180 degrees. When we saw him basically shift from being an ideological trade warrior, so basically this hyper-zealous guy, which was Trump from the election to 9 April, to suddenly becoming a market whisperer. Our judgment was on 9 April, he was going to do everything he needed to do to placate markets, and therefore it was a super attractive buying opportunity. And at the same time, he's still running some pretty serious, intensive warfare with the boss of the Fed, Powell.
Yep, I see that.
And interestingly, and I think this is genius.
Because his term's coming up too.
Yeah, next year. But the genius trade that Trump looks like I think he's going to affect is he's going to pre-announce his successor, I think soon.
Announce Powell's successor.
Yeah, which is just genius. So he'll undermine Powell and anoint his successor, who's dovish, and the Fed will cut rates this year, and pretty aggressively, I think, because they can. And because rates are very high in the US. So they're around 4.5%. Here in Australia, they're at 3.85. And as you said on the show last time, we said that the RBA would cut in May. They cut in May. They're going to cut in July. There'll be 3 more cuts this year. So 5 cuts in total. Last time we spoke about the fact that, we were very bullish on housing. Sydney house prices started rising and Melbourne started rising in February, and they're climbing quickly.
Off the back of the 18th of February.
Cut.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we called that cut in December, and basically we're of the view that the housing market would turn in February. And it's actually, notwithstanding we expected it, it's quite amazing how interest rate elastic the market is. And Sydney prices and Melbourne prices going gangbusters.
When you mean elastic, you're talking about sensitive. So how the market responds quickly in, into other asset classes, particularly housing. Just explain something to our listeners. When you go off and buy global bonds, which whether they be issued out of the US or Australia, wherever. How do you make money in these markets? How does Coolabah make money for its clients or for its base of investors?
Firstly, our yield's really attractive right now. So we're earning interest rates on our bond portfolios of around 7 to 8%.
Which is much higher than people would get if they put it in the bank, for
Correct.
example.
So our yield's really attractive. And then when we buy and sell bonds, we trade about $500 million to $1 billion a day, and we make money 80, 90% of the time.
Because other people would like to buy those very attractive interest rates from you because they're not getting it anymore.
Correct.
And they pay you a capital gain.
Correct.
Yep.
Exactly. So we might buy a bond paying 5.1% and sell it for a yield of 5%. And that lower yield will give us a bit of price appreciation. And that capital gain augments our total return.
And the reason you make capital gain is because you don't buy one bond at 5.1 and sell it at 5. You buy hundreds of millions.
Yeah. And
dollars.
we're trading up to $1 to $2 billion a day.
Right.
And, I've got the 50, 60 super smart guys and girls that work for us, much smarter than me. I'm the brawn, they're the brains. I'm the window dressing, but yeah, crazy smart team. I mean, lots of university medalists and PhDs and super smart dudes.
How do you find these people?
We actually find I like to call us like the odd bods. Like our guys are always just that crazy smart guy or girl who's sitting inside a big organization, who's not political, who's probably been stiffed on comp a few times, and wants to be part of a big team.
Stiff on comp meaning they missed out on a commission that they were expecting to get or didn't get a bonus or something like that.
But they're not political.
Yeah.
But they are the smartest guys in the room. And they want to play a team sport.
Basically underappreciated.
Yeah. And all of our guys are pretty idiosyncratic, a little eccentric, but they're all team players.
Oh.
And Coolabah is a team sport. Like, we're 50, 60 very talented guys and girls, but it's like a machine. It's not one person making decisions. 98% of our trading is driven by models, so financial models. And there's no rock stars, there's no heroes. That $1 billion a day that we're trading is quantitative.
So when the RBA does its modelling, and most people think that the RBA just sits around there and they'll put their hand up, yay or nay. There's actually the people within the RBA, the people who work there, as opposed to the board. They make submissions as to what should happen, but the RBA is continually doing modelling. I mean, they run off. I think one of the models, the AI models used is called Martin, I think, or something along those lines.
Right, the Martin model of macroeconomy.
And there's another one, DGSE. I don't know what it stands for, but in any event, what are your guys doing relative to analytics around what the RBA is doing? Because I just get this feeling that most people out there think that we're just sort of saying, well, that number coming out of the Australian Bureau of Statistics was a bit low, or it's a great 2.1 is a great headline inflation rate, 2.4 is a great trim mean, and therefore we should just reduce interest rates. No, the RBA has got all these variables that they stick into their models. And we'll come back to the model in a second, but they stick into the models, and that spits out a result. And there's lots of variables, like there's millions of them. Well, not millions. There's a lot anyway. And then they build different scenarios for sensitivity. What do you guys do? Do you do work around that stuff too? Well, your team I'm talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, most of our modelling is pricing the right interest rate for CBA or ANZ or NAB to pay us on their debt. So
on a bond that you might have bought from them.
Correct. So we're lending money to everyone in the world, Google, Apple, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, CBA. And what we do is price the interest rates better than anyone in the world, we believe. And we require a huge amount of tech to do that. So we have like 80 models that we use around the world. And we also more or less let the models trade. So we have algos that trade alongside our humans effectively.
So it's like proper quant.
Yeah. I mean, like 98% of our trading is quantitative.
What about when sentiment gets involved and the quant doesn't understand it?
Yeah, so that's where the 2% comes in.
Right, okay.
Where, it's just not a cookie cutter trade. It might be April, or, there might be a trade war, or it might be Trump backflipping.
Yep.
And then the team stepping in and saying, okay, well, wait a second. The models are saying things are cheap, but we also think there's a regime change here.
Yeah, well, there's a personality as well.
Yeah, Trump's shifting course, and that's really important for future pricing. So in addition to pricing every bond in the world all day, every day, we also run a ton of modeling to try and predict what the RBA and the Fed are going to do. Not because we punt interest rates. So this is a little bit confusing. We don't bet on the direction of the RBA or the
Before
Fed.
they make a decision.
Correct.
No.
We never do that. We just price bonds. But we want to understand what the RBA is going to do and what the Fed will do before anyone else, so that we can better trade the bonds.
Yeah. So just to take it back a step, just to, you're very technical and super bright. I'll just try to put that into Mark speak. So when you buy the bonds, you buy them at whatever the issue price is. That's whoever's issuing the bonds, could be ANZ, whatever it is, and whatever the issue price is, and the rate they're offering you, interest rate they're offering you. But what you're talking about is when you do this analysis, or your team does this analysis in a quantitative sense, using perhaps software or the systems doing it for you. Just put aside the qualitative stuff in a second. We'll come back to that because I want to talk about Trump. You're trying to get a sense of what the RBA is going to do, so you know whether to get ahead of it by doing a trade in relation to what you already hold.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way I describe it is that we don't trade macro like the RBA or what they're going to do almost all the time. However, once or twice a year or once every couple of years, macro is really important. Macro is super important in March and April. So because of our macro modeling, and our macro guys were saying Trump's going to be crazy hawkish on trade, and that's going to blow up equities, we'd hedged 25 to 15% of all our risk in March before Liberation Day, and we'd sold a lot of our bonds. And then because of our macro analysis in mid-April, on the 9th of April, we thought that there was another regime and that he was going to be much more of a guy that tried to assuage market concerns and manage markets, and that this would be risk positive. So our macro influenced the 1.7 billion of buying we did on the 9th of April. And to talk of geopolitics, I mean, that's been very important for our trading as well. I mean, I was sitting last week, or say 2 weeks ago in Zurich at the airport, and I think we've developed quite a good capacity to read Trump and to discern his tells. He's got clear tells.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So like when he came out and said just before Israel launched its onslaught against Iran, he came out and made this really strong statement.
This is 13, 14, 15 days ago.
Yeah. And he said there is no risk of Israel attacking Iran imminently, but they might do it so at some point. Internally, we were of the view that he was engaging in subterfuge and that there was a good chance that actually Israel was about to strike immediately, and that's exactly what happened.
And in that process,
and I wrote about this actually in the AFR, and the reason being,
I read about that. Yeah.
The reason being is he just can't help himself. He's a massive front runner of inside information. So whenever Trumpy has the good oil, which he, as president of the United States and leader of the free world, ostensibly, he gets the juice all the time
because there's something cooking.
Well, he knows what everyone's going to do, right? All the time. And he can't help himself. He wants to be man in the middle. He wants to be the center of attention. And so I thought he was being, I said to my guys, he's come out bizarrely and said, there's no chance of an Israeli strike. But Israel's going to do what Israel's going to do. They're an independent sovereign state. Yeah, they'll be influenced by him. But it's kind of bizarre that he's taken away that sort of sovereign right and that decision-making. And he would front run whether they wouldn't strike, because he's also taking away their capacity to capitalize on strategic surprise. Why would he do that? It doesn't make sense. So I said to my guys, I actually think they're going to have a shot because this is Trump playing games. He's trying to manipulate global perceptions of what they will and won't do. And subsequently, apparently he was all in on it. And he said that to mislead the Iranians. But the really interesting thing was then, so I was sitting in Zurich airport, I guess almost a week later, and I was catching a flight to Dubai, and I had a conference call with my traders in London and New York. And as I'm talking to them, I'm reading this article that says that Trump's come out and said that he's going to give Iran basically 2 weeks, that he'll make a decision on whether to strike Iran in approximately 2 weeks' time. And I said to my guys, I think he's going to go. I think he's going to go this weekend. And I wrote this in the Financial Review as well. I said on the Friday before he bombed Iran, I said in the AFR, I think he's going to have a shot this weekend. And so we sold about $300 to $500 million of bonds in that phone call just because I wanted to de-risk. And dude, I then jump onto the Emirates flight and I wake up in the middle of the flight and the whole plane's, I can feel the G-forces pushing me back into the seat. The plane's kind of switching direction in an unusually sort of rapid way. And I hit the in-flight map. We're right on top of Baghdad, like literally right above Baghdad, flying through Iraqi airspace. And then I go to my phone and I look at my Bloomberg chat and there's a headline that the guys have put up, missile sighted in Iraq heading towards Iran from Israel. And then I chatted with my guys and said, what's going on? Any more headlines? And then they hit me with a stream of headlines. And so as we were over Baghdad, the Israelis had launched their war and fired 330 missiles at Iran. And we were evacuating the airspace. And I opened my window shade and looked out the window. I don't know what they were, but it was a very clear night sky. I could see Baghdad below us, all the lights, the city lights. And I could see about 5 different things moving at great pace through the sky. Whether they were cruise missiles, fast jets, I don't know. And that the Iraqi airspace within an hour would be a no-fly zone. And so that was pretty discombobulating. And then we arrived in Dubai and I'm like, holy shit,
get me off.
Yeah, game on. And then, of course, Trump himself bombs Iran. So this, to answer your question, fund managers and investors sometimes say things like stock pickers will say, I pick stocks, I don't do macro. And I think that's horseshit. I think you got to do everything. And that's what we try and build, we try and bring to bear unrelenting intellectual horsepower in every conceivable vector, whether it's pricing the bonds, predicting what the RBA is going to do. So we run a ton of quant models that are solely geared towards trying to forecast what the Fed's going to do, what the RBA is going to do, not because we're trading it day to day, but once a year it might be relevant. And also doing a ton of geopolitical work. So, we built AI models that for the first time in history, we've published research on this. You can go to our website, predictingwar.com. We published years ago.
Go to your website, Coolabah, and you look on the tab predictingwar.com.
And there's actually a separate website called predictingwar.com. We created it about 7, 8, 9 years ago. And we built AI models to predict military conflicts between nation states using 200 years of military conflict data. The University of Michigan data set. But we wanted to show you could put a probability on these things. If you look at, what nation states are saying about one another, if you look at the development of their, military capability, their power projection capacity, if you look at their demography, their economics, the models are quite accurate. And, for example, they put a 49% probability of the US and China being involved in some sort of conflict over the next 10 years. And we published research on it. No one had ever done, but no one had ever put empirical probabilities, predictive probabilities on the prospect of military conflicts before. And I wanted to show that data can give you a lot of insight on this. So I think we got the, we did a good job of anticipating the initial Israeli strikes.
That allowed you to de-risk?
No, we actually didn't do anything in response to that. So we didn't monetize that insight, but we then definitely did monetize the second event when we anticipated that Trump would strike over that weekend and bomb Iran with the B-2 stealth bombers and the GBU-57 MOP bombs, the 12,000 ton bombs.
30,000 pounds, yes.
Yeah, that he dropped on Fedor and Natanz and the third nuclear site. And so we de-risked ahead of that. And then when he executed that mission, we then so after he basically announced to the world, our bombers are out of Iranian airspace. No American souls have been hurt. We've obliterated these nuclear targets. We actually put all the risk back on immediately and have continuously added risk. And our view was
that's buying.
Yeah, continuously bought billions. And that's because our view was a few things. We think Khomeini's dead. We think his son's dead. We've been arguing this.
You still think that?
Yeah, I don't know, but we've thought for about a week or so that Khomeini's dead. I think it's very,
because we haven't seen him.
We haven't seen him. We haven't heard from him.
You've seen the foreign minister all the
time.
We
haven't seen his successor, which is his son. They're all MIA. And so we think either Khomeini's dead and his son's dead, which I think is very, very likely, or there's been some sort of regime change that we don't know about yet. But I think the Iranians are going to reveal whatever they reveal in due course. And it looks like the 600 kilos of enriched uranium was inside Fedor. So you remember there was all this reporting that, they evacuated with it. But I think the intelligence suggests it was actually sitting inside Fedor and it's been buried in there. And the kind of mainstream media claims that they did no damage to Fedor are absolute horseshit. Like all the damage assessments from the Iranians, from the Israelis, and now from the CIA say that, this stuff was very, very seriously damaged and has put the program back many, many years. So macro is important, mate, as you know. Like you
I do it all the time, but
trade macro your whole life.
But I mean, what I find extraordinarily interesting is working out the tell based on language, and it's not just based on words, but it's based on timing. There are probably a number of elements in these things, and we used to sort of do this with the Reserve Bank and the Jerome Powell as well. Used to always trying to sort of second guess what he or she's going to do. And set your interest rates, for example. And in my case, set my interest rates ahead of a rate reduction, trying to get ahead of her and get market share. It's a bit more difficult today, but it's interesting in terms of the trades that you do, that you look at, use your quant models, but then you go off and you do your sort of, your reasonableness assessment, your overall assessment based on what you see and where you see and what you hear. How many other things leading up to that, and I'll get off this in a sec, but this intrigues me. How many other things, for example, when Trump was not available to talk to Albanese, and the meeting of the G7, what it was when Albanese turned up, Trump sort of made himself unavailable. Do you look at those things and also say, hang on, something was big going on?
Yeah, 100%. The signal in the noise wasn't just that. It was the key for me where I thought, okay, this is really on. So we thought he'd bomb them that weekend, even though he'd set the world up to think it was 2 weeks away. Yeah. Because he can't help himself. Again, he wants to be a man in the middle. He wants to be smarter than everyone else. And he is freaking smart. Like, he is serially underestimated. Like, I'm 100% certain Trump is crazy smart. Guy who's never drunk. He's never done drugs. Yes, he's got all these hyperbolic and other sort of, for many people unsavory characteristics. But this dude he's an absolute weapon, right?
Can we just get into that a little bit? Like, because I'm
waiting before we do. Let me answer your question.
Yeah.
Because there was something interesting. So he bolts from the G7 for his emergency national security meetings. He has multiple meetings over the course of the weekend. But the thing that was really interesting for me, where I thought, okay, we've really got this right, was he's always giving presses. So he's always talking to the media. Every time he's in Air Force One, he's giving, basically a doorstop interview. And on this occasion, to the national security meeting and from the national security meeting, he refused to talk to the media. And I thought that's different. So the accumulation of evidence, the fact that he once again tried to mislead the world about the timetable and he wanted to be the smartest guy in the room, the fact that Israel had aerial superiority and it was a very easy mission to execute, the fact that the GBU-57s are really the only weapon that can penetrate 60 meters of high-performance concrete, and even then the GBU-57s, which are the 30,000-pound bombs that they dropped on Natanz and Fedor.
14 of them.
12 to 14, yeah. But even though they actually can't get through 60 meters of high performance concrete, so they drop them through the the air conditioning shafts, so the ventilation shafts. So for me, and also being a narcissist, I thought this is just such a perfect window of opportunity where he can come in. The Israelis had done all the heavy lifting. They killed 30 generals. They'd got rid of all the air defenses, all the aircraft, decimated Iran. And he just comes over the top with his, 7, deathly looking stealth B2 Raiders and finishes the Iranians off. And then, so this is the Khamenei puzzle that we still don't know the answer to. He tweets out afterwards that the hit, quote unquote, is what sealed the peace deal, right? He says like our, raid on these nuclear sites and the hit, but he puts it in inverted commas, sealed the peace deal. I reckon he was intimating to a Khamenei hit. So I think he's got the old double entendre going. And so the one hit was obviously the hit on the nuclear sites, but the other hit was, I think he knows that Khamenei's gone. It's also interesting, fascinating actually. He called for regime change in Iran. He called for MIGA, make Iran great again. And then now when they've asked him, what about regime change in Iran? He says, we don't need regime change in Iran. that would be chaos. That would be a huge problem. For me, what he's actually saying is we've already had regime change in Iran. We're now dealing with the new guys, and we're fine with that.
That's very interesting. And why do you think that it hasn't been revealed yet? Is it because the Iranians just don't want to tell the world?
Yeah, I think they want to manage the optics. I mean, they've just had the worst 12-day war, arguably, and ranks up there in the history of warfare as one of the most one-sided conflicts ever. So, as a proud nation, they're obviously, humiliated. And I think it's also, there's a real problem in terms of geopolitical precedent with a nation state knocking off a national leader. It doesn't really happen often. It's very, very rare. So I think neither the Israelis nor the Americans really want to author that assassination, even though it's extremely likely that he and his son and his wider family have all been assassinated, because they were sitting in a bunker in northern Tehran. I think it's called Levizan, the suburb, and the Israelis and the Americans, I think, were pounding. Well, the Israelis were certainly pounding that bunker. Remember, Trump came out and boasted on Twitter or Truth Social that he knew exactly where Khamenei was, and we weren't going to kill him yet, right? We weren't going to take him out at this point. But he I could be wrong, but I think he's been taken out.
That is, if I could just go one step further on the cynicism that some people might suggest is just cynicism, but in terms of timing, do you think the whole thing was time for his arrival at NATO to sort of take control of NATO as well? Because if I'm wanting to convince everyone at NATO, you now spend 5% or 3.5 plus 1.5 of your GDP on defence. But if I want to convince you, I want to show you that I can do what I say I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you think the whole thing was timed around this NATO thing? Am I being super cynical here?
Well, I mean, just take a step even further back. I mean, it's extraordinary. This has been a multi-decade problem for the world, dealing with a theocracy that is hell-bent on trying to eviscerate America and Israel. I mean, it's a really serious problem, and that was also hell-bent on weaponizing uranium and developing nuclear weapons that they could potentially provide to the Houthis and their terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah. So this was a profound multi-decade problem that George Bush, Obama, Clinton, and Biden and Trump had never been able to resolve. And in one fell swoop, Trump has again, superficially dealt with the problem now, but also in a very kinetic, aggressive way, like sending in 7 stealth bombers and bombing these guys, back into the dark ages. It's pretty full on. I'd never thought about the NATO angle. I think you're right. I think he wanted to capitalize on that window ahead of NATO. But here's the next profound point.
Because it's literally a week after.
But Mark,
and he's not going to go unless he controls it. I mean, if you saw where he sat next to the president of NATO, right next to him, and actually they changed the whole event for him. So because he doesn't like to sit too long in those conversations, so they actually said, okay, we're just going to have one-on-ones. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, but here's what's even more amazing is this guy, the Celebrity Apprentice star, your former business partner, right, has single-handedly changed European history. Like, he has reversed the course of European history by forcing these otherwise previously very dovish from a military perspective states who were spending nothing on defense to boost defense spending to 5% of GDP. I mean, that's extraordinary. That's sort of in line with long-term US defense spending, but no one in the world spends that much on defense aside from America and China. Here in Australia, we're spending less than half that. And we're in arguably just—
And with small GDP relative to everybody else.
And we're arguably in a, equally, if not more precarious position, given our proximity to the South China Sea, Taiwan. But Trump has done this. No one else has done this. Like, he was excoriated for, not being a multilateralist and for threatening to withdraw from NATO and for being, Putin's bitch and then Elon Musk's bitch and then China's bitch and North Korea's bitch. But actually, he's there was some sort of interview I saw in the last 24 hours where apparently the American head of NATO referred to him as daddy. And this is Trump. But he's proven he's the guy with the big swinging dick, and he's a trigger puller. Like, he's a killer. And
so the Trump trade, the so-called Trump trade,
the taco trade. That was the other thing.
So he's absolutely blasted it.
Yeah. So, Trump always chickens out the taco trade.
Taco trade.
That was the other reason I thought he'd go hard and go quickly.
He wouldn't like that.
He would have hated the taco trade. And then this taco trade was getting a huge amount of narrative or narrative momentum in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And that would have that's the antithesis of the way he sees himself. He sees himself as a hitter.
Yeah.
Right. And he makes decisions, and he often changes his mind, but which he's entitled to do, right? Like, he wages forever trade war on everyone, and then he decides, a week and a half later that he'll do deals, but he won't do deals with China. He's saying he'll do deals with China, but the reality is they're decoupling, right? That manufacturing is coming home, and that's his key mission. He wants to square up the rest of the world and make sure that people don't cheat on trade, and I think that's a perfectly kind of reasonable ambition. But isn't it interesting that this guy that has been dismissed by everybody as being hyper myopic and just incapable of rational, cogent, deep, strategic thought. This is the dude that is revolutionizing the geostrategic environment in the Middle East and Europe. I mean, it's extraordinary.
And he's only been there since January too.
He's just been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize as a result of the and not only does he bomb the Iranians into oblivion, but he has also catalyzed and negotiated the ceasefire. And I presume now that Ukraine and Russia are in the crosshairs. And he's kind of started to create a lot of distance between himself and Putin, because he's running around now saying, well, Putin offered to mediate between – Putin rang me and said, I'll mediate between Iran and Israel. And he said, dude, you mediate your own war.
Yeah. My
problem's with you, mate. You're not mediating anything on my behalf. He said this.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and it's classically sort of – he's a preternatural businessman. Like, I take you at face value until I can't take you at face value. But when I can't take you at face value, I'm going to treat you differently. And that's the way Trump seems to work. It's very iterative. We were talking about this before. He's massively adaptive. Like, he's constantly iterating his business model or his mental model to adjust for the circumstances. If people want to be, do handshake deals and principle-based transactions, I can do that. But if they fuck me over, well, then I'll fuck them back 5 times harder, and then we'll see, what the consequences are.
If I could just flip back to, because that stuff's fascinating, in terms of someone being so strategic and not on their own. Obviously, you've got a team, but someone being so strategic in such a short period. He's only been the president for most of this year. So, but if I just track back one step, in terms of the bringing manufacturing back to the United States, and the point you just made, decoupling. Maybe we could just spend a little bit of time thinking about that, particularly in relation to interest rates, because in the US and if we take what you just said as being correct, and I tend to agree with, I do agree with you, his constant belligerent behavior against the current Federal Reserve boss, Jerome Powell, would be indicative of a bigger strategic plan. It's not just because he doesn't like him. There's a bigger strategic plan. Why do you think he wants to get interest rates down in America, irrespective of, just take inflation out of it? Why is he trying to make money cheaper in the United States? And why does he want to decouple from China? And why would he be happy for the US dollar to suffer as a result of that? There's some obvious examples, reasons for it, but maybe you could explain that, they might manufacture, they need to export, get better currency results. Why don't you take us through that?
So when you peel back the onion on Trump, there's always a really lucid strategic clarity underpinning his decision-making. That's what I'm finding.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Trump acolyte. I didn't have strong views on him in his first administration.
No, he's different this time around, 100%.
Yeah, and this is the key point. He's different.
Yeah, totally different.
Which doesn't normally happen. Like, we've just elected our government. Albo's going to be exactly the same. Chalmers is going to be the same. And presumably they're emboldened because they think they have a mandate. So they're going to do more of the same. We're not going to see, I doubt, much iteration or evolution other than them doubling down on whatever they were doing in the past, which is spending a shitload of money.
And some tax reform.
Crowding out the private sector and government solving all of our problems. And tax reform, which will be interesting, right? So I think the Trump program is actually really simple, but it is intricate. So part one is, we set up this free trade system after World War II, and we said we'll trade with anyone. And over the period since that time, we dropped all of our tariffs and our trade subsidies. And the idea was, if everyone trades on equal terms, Mark builds houses, Chris has a factory that produces clothes. That's your comparative advantage. That's my competitive advantage. And we all benefit from trade and we're prosperous. And that's the capitalist model, the Western liberal democratic model, which worked incredibly well post-World War II. But then, of course, some countries started to cheat, like Australians cheated. We decided to subsidise the production of movies and we started stealing investment from Hollywood. No one really talks about this, but the reality is we've stolen a ton of investment from Hollywood. And then Trump turns around and says, actually, I'm going to whack 100% tariffs on any foreign-made films. And we're like, oh, shock horror, how could you do that? But the truth is we just can't compete with Hollywood. And so we're cheating by getting government to kind of,
sponsor them.
Yeah, compensate for our deficiencies. So he's like, we need to square everybody up globally. But the main culprit here has been China. China's been, cheating relentlessly and also stealing intellectual property and been very strategic in trying to dominate key market sectors that have long-term geostrategic value, like telecommunications, for example, with Huawei. And so Trump's like, we've actually thought we were outsourcing all of our manufacturing to a benign partner in China over the last 30, 40 years, but actually they've ended up with control of all of our supply chains. In the event of any kinetic conflict, we're really screwed. And the truth is now with automation, AI and digital printing, we can produce all this stuff at home because obviously Musk has been an influence in the background. Musk with SpaceX and with Tesla has proven you can build anything you want in America and be world beating. He's got a monopoly in, the global satellite business, more or less. And he was dominant in the EV business until the Chinese stole all his IP and created BYD, and BYD started decimating Tesla. So I think part one is he wants to get trade back on an equal footing. Part two is, unless you're a trusted counterparty, as in if you're going to try and ass fuck us 24/7 and you're going to present a serious, potentially existential military threat to us, as are the Chinese in his view, he's not going to trade with you at all, and he's going to bring all that investment home. So that's the game plan. And to do that, you need to have credible trade barriers. And that investment, reshoring that home, will create massive growth in the US. So that's really positive for the United States.
Massive economic growth.
Massive economic growth, but it'll also create capacity, and that all things being equal, on the one hand, the investment could be inflationary, but the capacity could be deflationary. But just that's one part of his program. The second part of his program is he wants to deliver about $8.1 trillion of tax cuts, massive tax cuts, but he has to pay for them. And if he doesn't have money, he's got to borrow the money, and that means he's got to issue $8.1 trillion worth of debt. And that's going to push up long-term interest rates because people like me, the Chris Joyes of the world, are going to say, actually, Trumpy, I'm not going to lend you that money unless you pay me higher rates. And that's generally what's happened. The US 10-year government bond yield has risen from about 3.6% in September last year to mid-4s. And people are very worried about the global tsunami of government borrowing and therefore the debt binge. Partly because here in Australia, the states and the feds are spending crazy amounts of money. Our government as a share of our economy is the biggest it's been since World War II. Our government here in Australia has accounted for 2/3 of all economic growth since the pandemic and has accounted for more than 50% of all jobs growth.
And that's not just federal, both state and federal.
Federal and state. So that's Australia. Now, the Europeans are saying, well, we're going to spend 5% of GDP, having done circa 1%, to fund defense. So where are they going to get that money? They have to borrow the money, massive amount of debt, which means it's actually perversely good for someone like me because it means I'm going to get great interest rates on those bonds, right? So it means long-term interest rates are going to stay high. But coming back to Trumpy, he wants people to pay lower taxes. I get that. In California, if you're a top income earner, you're a top producer, you're paying more than 50, 55% tax.
That's because you pay Californian tax too.
And federal
tax. Yeah.
And in New York, you pay over 50% as well. But in Florida, where they're running budget surpluses and they're running their finances really well, you only pay 38% total tax if you're a top income earner. So a lot of people are moving from New York and California down to Texas, where you have the same thing, 38% top tax, and Florida. And so the US has had this cathartic internal conflict that's created the huge intense debate between the Republicans and the Democrats because they're seeing economic mayhem and social mayhem in California particularly. San Francisco, kind of failing city, California, failed state, massive budget deficits, sort of on the brink of insolvency. And then they're seeing the counterfactual, which is Florida and Texas, budget surpluses, crime under control generally, business thriving and flourishing. And that's, I think, what's galvanized the momentum behind Trump's program. So he wants to get taxes lower. He's got to fund them. To do that, he's got to get rid of big government. Specifically, he's got to shrink government by 15%. It's not that much. If he does that, he gets about $1 trillion a year in savings, and that fully pays for the tax cuts. Now, if you shrink government and you cut government spending by 15% or $1 trillion a year, that's deflationary because all that money, $1 trillion a year, was going out there to contractors, builders, service providers and government employees. And they were spending that money. That demand goes. So that's deflationary and that creates job losses. On the other hand, the tax cuts are inflationary because that's more money in people's pockets. They can spend that. And then clearly the returning all the supply chains back to America, so reshoring the manufacturing, getting this massive manufacturing boom in the US, which I think will happen. It'll happen much faster than people think over the next few years. That's also inflationary. But the key point is the Fed thinks a normal interest rate is 3%. They're currently at 4.25 to 4.5. Inflation's been pretty benign. Tariffs will push up inflation temporarily, but it'll pass through the data like a pig through a python. And here and now, the Fed should be cutting. Now, Trump is right about Powell. So this is where the signal and the noise is. Powell's a bit of a dickhead, okay? I shouldn't probably say that, but I'll tell you, he was very political prior to and during the US election. So he was pulling super hard for Biden and Harris, and they were cutting when they shouldn't have been cutting, as I argued at the time. As soon as Trump was elected, they stopped cutting. Basically, they cut once more in December. But basically, they said, we're not going to do any more cuts. They haven't cut since. And he's been quite reckless in the way that he's been talking about for example, the tariffs. He's been trying to maximize financial market volatility. He's been trying to sheet home as much blame to Trump for the tariffs, even though the tariffs in and of themselves are necessary and reasonable because everyone in the world's been cheating and stealing American sort of basically stealing their prosperity, particularly the Chinese, anyone who hasn't been trading on fair terms. And he's just trying to square them up. So you do need tariffs of some sort to rewrite the global economy. But the ultimate end game is we're going to have multiple trading blocks. We're going to have the non-democratic authoritarian states, the Chinas, the Irans, the Russias, the North Koreas trading with themselves and probably some African and Asian nations. And then you have the Western liberal democracies. But you can see this is a big juggling act. Tax cuts on the one hand, cutting government spending on the other hand, reshoring supply chains, and then issuing potentially a lot of debt. If you can't get the government spending changes, he will have to issue a lot of debt. And this comes back to the Fed. The Fed's at 4.5%. Inflation in the US has been benign. Normal is 3%. So what Trump is saying, you should be closer to 3% and you should be moving towards 3%. And they haven't been doing that.
We, the America, the country, as a borrower,
yep,
could be paying a lot less interest. If you reduce the rate.
Yeah, that's the one-liner. The one-liner is, the Americans have a lot of government debt. Potentially that government debt's going to increase unless they crush government spending. So Trump wants to get the interest rate down on that government debt. And one way to do that is definitely to try and get the Fed to cut. But I think intellectually, he's right. The Fed should be cutting. I mean, I think the Fed should be cutting right now. It's not that they should put rates at a really low level, but they should probably be getting closer to neutral. And they're miles away from neutral. At 4.25 to 4.5, neutral's 3. They should be much closer to 3. And I think, he's had it with Powell. And so his latest, I think, move is to say, you know what, I'm going to appoint your successor.
Or name him.
Name your successor. Yeah. Exactly. And then that will completely undermine Powell's authority. And Powell will be forced now to contend with an internal replacement that he'll have to some extent, reflect the will of. So it's all really interesting. And the world's definitely a more safe and stable place post Trump bombing Iran. Just make no mistake about that. Like everyone feels better about the Middle East. The Saudis are happy. The Syrians are happy. The Jordanians are very happy. The Israelis are happy.
The Emirates are happy.
The Emirates are very happy.
Even Qatar's happy.
Everyone's, even Qatar and Oman, which have had close ties to Iran. They're probably neutral to positive. So one guy's done this.
And it's just quite amazing.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is quite amazing because I never.
And
thought,
we don't have leadership like that here in this country, mate.
Well, yeah, but
you should run for office.
Thanks very much. So let's just peel it back.
Seriously, Mark, you should do something.
But you can't run for office in this country. The problem is in this country, you can in the US, but you can't in this country. In this country, you've got to be in a party. The party's got to win or be able to do deals with somebody else and have a coalition, so to speak. And then you've got to be by your party voted in to be the dude. And that's the problem in this country. That's the issue around that. I mean, it's fraught with danger. If I could just peel it back then. So relative to anyone who's listening to this who's interested in interest rates and prosperity here in Australia, which, by the way, is the RBA's mandate, welfare and prosperity of all Australians, by the way, which is the terminology in its mandate. What do you think all this means for Australia? So I'm not going to talk, just put interest rates aside for the moment. What do you think this means for us just as a nation? What's happening in the US?
I'm actually loath to kind of talk about it because I've got some pretty serious concerns and fears. Short term, like we're spending like drunken sailors. So all that
At government levels.
all that public money from the states and the feds is going to mean that growth in Australia is going to be good. And the economy
Will look good.
The economy is going to be totally fine because the government will be powering that growth.
Well, in terms of GDP measurement.
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
but that doesn't mean it's good.
No, it doesn't mean it's
good. Because if you
good.
go to look at private sector's part, it's not so good.
Yeah, it's abysmal. And then we've also got super strong population growth, and a lot of these new immigrants have voted for Labor. And so that's going to continue. And it's putting a lot of pressure on cities. But as far as the economic data is concerned, people come to the country, they spend money, that's positive. In the long run, I mean, we're really screwed.
Do you think we should be using – okay. Do you think GDP today is a poor measurement of how well we're doing because it can be manipulated?
Yes, yeah, 100% it can be manipulated. I mean, it's a measurement. It's a very carefully measured proxy for the rate of change in output over time. But I mean, what I'm focused on is productivity, and what that means is output per hour worked. So how much we produce for the amount of time we put into it. And on that basis, Australia looks terrible. I mean, we on a productivity basis, labor productivity and total what's called multi-factor productivity, but basically
it's gone backwards, MFP.
Yeah, it's gone backwards. So whether you look at broad productivity or just labor productivity, what you see is Australia's productivity performance, has not really improved over a quarter of a century, and we're lagging Europe, we're lagging by a long way the US, and we're going to end up Asia's Ibiza. We're going to be a beach resort for rich, members of the glitterati in the Indo-Pacific region. And it's okay for the short term. It's okay probably for the next 5, 10, 15 years, but eventually for our, children's children, it's going to be a massive problem, and we won't produce anything. There won't be any entrepreneurship, any real innovation. And then living standards will start to decay significantly.
Well, they already have, but not significantly. Because one of the things I found quite fascinating the other day when I was looking at capital investment, so in other words, the amount of money that gets reinvested by not only the private sector but also by the government in terms of how efficient I should say employees can be. For example, the various tools that employees can use to be much more productive. Our capital investments like at an all-time low. As you just mentioned, our productivity, relatively speaking, has been, in terms of normal measurements, is ridiculously low, and it's probably the worst it's been for a long, long time. But what really fascinated me was 80% of our productivity is coming from services sector, and it doesn't come out of actual products.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
80%. And of course, I'm not having a go at you, Jim. But when you keep putting people on into the public service, and not having our public servants either, because there's a space for public service. Don't get me wrong, but the more times you just keep loading up the employment number, or the number of people employed as a result of all the people you bring into the country, the more times you continue to do that, you're just building up this services sector, which by definition, generally speaking, isn't that productive. So as a result of that, the productivity of the country is very, very low. Opposite in the United States, opposite in Germany. And have a look at the amount of capital that Germany and the US have reinvested. Yeah. We aren't investing anything into our public service in terms of making them more efficient and therefore more productive.
You're exactly right, Mark. And it's interesting. Well, not only are we not really producing anything in Australia, like tangible goods, that's all been offshored, but we're not actually investing in technology or software.
Capital investment, yeah.
But we're not investing in technology to support our services.
Yeah, correct. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
we're just saying go and do the job. So people working longer hours, more hours.
Yeah.
But they're not working more efficiently and therefore being more productive.
So it doesn't matter how you slice and dice it, whether you look at research and development, whether you look at the amount of money that firms are investing in technology, software, and tools to make their employees more productive, whether you look at overall capital spending, labor productivity, which is abysmal, total productivity, terrible. It's just a disaster. And we're kind of just kicking the can down the road by bringing massive amounts of people in the country to grow through population growth, and by borrowing from the future and spending today. A state like Victoria, just prior to the pandemic in 2019, I think owed the world 45, 50 billion. Within a few years, Victoria will owe the world close to 300 billion. And it's interesting. I saw Peter Thiel in the last 24 hours came out and said that he thinks the reason that millennials have sort of pivoted to a hard left political direction is they've got a lot of student debt and they can't afford to buy a home. So they're looking for the public sector to provide that panacea, to that solution. And I definitely, notice it when I speak to the younger generations that work for us, a lot of them voted Labor, and which is not a bad thing, Jim. I'm not party political. I don't really care. I just want solutions. But it is interesting. I think people, and particularly in a very entitled, complacent economy like Australia, where you've had just like you've been hit on the arse by every golden rainbow imaginable, world-beating population growth, world-beating endowments of commodities and natural resources, and now mega public spending and the absence of a bona fide recession since 1991. People have just become accustomed to expect these solutions to be pervade to them. And I think that's the problem. So Asia's Ibiza is the direction in which we're heading, a beach resort for, the well-heeled of the region. And I think it's a huge problem. But what can we do about it? In the meantime, in the short term, and, everyone's so myopic and hedonistic. In the short term, everything's going to be fine in Australia. Like rates are going to come down. The RBA will cut 3 times this year. The cash rate will go to 3%. It's currently at 3.85%. House prices are having been very weak in Sydney and Melbourne. House prices were falling in 2024. House prices are rising at a decent clip, not a crazy clip, but we'll get a very robust housing recovery, which is good.
Do you subscribe to the view, rate reductions, house price increases?
Of course, yeah.
You subscribe to the view, yeah.
Well, it's not it's an empirical fact.
Yeah.
I know my esteemed mate,
he doesn't. I saw something he put up on X recently. He doesn't subscribe to the view.
Oh, it's just wrong. I mean, it affects purchasing power. Like the only way, like interest rates coming down directly and very materially change the amount of debt that you can afford to assume,
and it goes straight into the property,
and therefore interest rates coming down directly impact the value of the property that you can purchase.
Because it's a mathematical formula,
and it gets capitalized into prices. And the only thing that can change that is supply.
Yeah.
And so you produce more houses, but we can't change supply instantaneously. That's a multi-year process. So the supply side, in the long run, the supply side should react to those changes in demand that are a function of changes in interest rates. But there's no doubt that house prices are highly interest rate sensitive. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, this is what this is called the transmission mechanism. The RBA cuts rates, that reduces, borrowing costs, and that shows up in the form of, more discretionary disposable income, higher house prices. So the housing market is a key channel through which monetary policy provides. It bequeaths that economic relief to the broader community. It's not a bad thing, but in
Australia, there's a lot of power for our monetary policy too. We observe it during the rate rise period because most Australians are on variable rates. But during a rate reduction period, that variable rate is pretty valuable.
Yeah,
and it actually reflects in the purchasing power, as you just said. It's amazing. It's actually just as solid on the way down as it is on the way up.
Well, I'll tell you this, and I'd say this to Kooky. I doubt Kooky's got to this, or maybe he has got to this part of the interview, but if you look at the daily CoreLogic house price indexes that I helped co-create, they're published on CoreLogic's website. You can see them every day. And you hit the back series tab on the CoreLogic website and you deselect every city except for Sydney. What you'll see is that Sydney prices were falling until the middle of February this year.
Yeah. To the 18th February.
The RBA cuts rates. Literally the same week they cut rates, house prices turned 180 degrees, started rising again. And then they rose and rose and rose. And then they started to stabilize a little bit until May. When May came along, we got the cut and they went off again to the races. So there's, it's unambiguously the case that prices are very responsive to changes in the purchasing power of those properties, which is governed by incomes. And
incomes are sort of fixed, but the amount of money you can borrow is variable.
Yeah,
because interest rates goes down, you can borrow more money. That's what we do. We lend you more money. Because when we do our calculation, your debt servicing ability is far greater because the interest rate we assume you're going to pay is much lower.
I actually want to ask you a question. Like you've had a bit to do with Trump yourself back in the day when he was the gregarious sort of entrepreneur and he wasn't in that political decision-making mode. But I remember asking you about this years ago and I actually can't remember your response. So what was he like?
Well, yeah, but the thing I found about Trump is very purposeful. So he knew everything he was doing down to the most minute detail, how he dressed, how he addressed the camera, what we talked about, because I interviewed him. I spent like 45 minutes interviewing him.
Really?
Yeah. We did a live TV interview, on Channel 9, which I'm trying to get a copy of, but I can't find it. But it's his purposefulness in relation to his answers and everything he tracks, and he sits on the same topics. Doesn't matter what questions I ask, he knew what answers he wanted to give me.
Yeah, so interesting, because I see that that mindfulness and purposefulness that you mention. You see that actually in his interviews now.
He knows what he wants to get out before he gets there.
He's delivering those very, very clearly cultivated messages, but he's also very strategic with their delivery. Have you seen there's a really good little video of him recently where he's getting ready for an interview. Have you seen this one? And so there's two actually. So he's prepping for an interview, and there's a table with a glass of water next to him, and he's just sitting there, and the camera's rolling and the mic's hot. And he says, "Hey, John, move that table." And so he moves the table, and he just sits, and he says, "Actually, bring it back and bring the glass back." And the glass has a little piece of paper on top of the glass. He says, "Get rid of the piece of paper on top of the glass and get rid of the mat under the glass." And he's just looking at himself in the camera. He says, "Yeah, that's perfect." And then there's another shot of him in the Oval Office, and he's recording his commentary on I think the US economy, and he's being fairly there's a lot of gesticulation, and he's quite emphatic. And somebody coughs halfway through, it's just a kind of distant cough you can hear in the background. He goes, stop. Why the hell would you cough in the room? Leave the room. And he said, let's roll again. And he kind of seamlessly just slides straight back into that discourse. But yeah, super, super interesting.
I would say this, Chris, irrespective of your politics, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Liberal or a Labor, whatever, never underestimate him. If you do, you're going to do it at your own peril.
100%.
The guy is on narrative, on brand, on everything he absolutely does. Like, he knows exactly what he's going to do, the outcome, and if it's not right, he gets it fixed. And he has the ability too, by the way, when I did the interview, to preempt where you might go first. And I won't say what he was asked me not to talk about, but he actually preempted a number of things to me before we got to that territory. And he did it through his head of PR person here. They come and told me.
Is that right?
Territories you cannot go. And then when we did talk about, funnily enough, he was extremely critical of China and Australia's relationship with China.
Is that right?
And I said to him, well, it's 70% of our trade, export trade. And he just didn't cop it. He just said, but they're raping you. He said they are taking you for a ride.
Yeah, wow.
And he did not. And I thought, well, chill, because this is they're a major trading partner. I think I don't want to go down the territory. But he didn't give a damn. So to some extent, I'll be honest with you, he's fearless.
Yeah, he's fearless.
Like in a 100%. Commercial sense, quite fearless. He doesn't care if the opposition hears what it is.
Half his ear blown off, and he was up there saying, "Fight, fight, fight." Yeah, the dude's got balls. Like, he's a hitter. Yeah, he's a real hitter. And it's interesting how controlled and strategic and disciplined he is with his own decisioning and external, as you were saying, communications. Like, everything, the no drinking, the no drugs, the appearance, the way everything's very, very carefully orchestrated.
Always on cue. Always.
Yeah. And
always.
then his messaging is just relentless.
And relentless is a good word, and we're not here trying to blow smoke up the president's bum, but in terms of observations, I think relentless is a good word. He's relentless with his messaging about himself and everything that he's trying to achieve in terms of his strategy. He's totally relentless, and even he's 79, just turned 79. That's quite amazing.
His mental acuity is incredible,
unbelievable.
Super sharp.
Bang, 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 and he's on, and everything's sort of set out. And I just want to quickly ask you,
before you go on. So one other point here that is important, to your comment that we're not here to blow wind up Trump's ass. Like, my job, I run 15 billion. My job is to anticipate what the mofo is going to do, right? Yeah. I have to, I invest a huge amount of resources in trying to study him and understand him. And then through that process, if I find his decision-making interesting and informative and illuminating, I'm actually trying to learn myself. Yeah. Like, how can I better prosecute my own decision-making problems? When you've got a guy that's been elected president twice, who's a multi-billionaire, okay, he comes with all his, again, let's say, acknowledged shortcomings, but there's signal in the noise. There's something everyone can learn from Trump.
And that's what today's about. And by the way, what do you read about the Musk trade?
Great question. Yeah. So I think he just blew up. I think he really regrets the, vicious exit. I think that was an amazing partnership. I really hoped that it would endure. I actually think there'll be a rapprochement at some point. Musk will come back tail between his legs. I mean, Musk got way over his skis. He was politicizing everything he touched. Tesla was blowing up. He was at risk of losing SpaceX contracts. He wasn't focused on his businesses. And, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to call him a narcissist, but he was clearly enjoying being in the Oval Office every day, sleeping in the Lincoln Room, doing joint press conferences with Trump all the time. And I guess being at the center of, global decision-making authority, dealing with leaders of nation states. So he was clearly getting off on that. You could see whether he has this ketamine addiction, I'm not sure, but it's clear that that he's an unusual cat. And it seemed, if you look at the tapes, he was on something.
And he has retracted a bit since.
Yeah, and he's definitely retracted a fair bit since. So, I mean, the big, beautiful bill, sure, it has a lot of pork barreling in it, but these things are always compromises. The tax cuts are important. The defense spending is important. I thought Doge had a lot of momentum behind it. So he kind of torched Doge. He torched his constituency inside the White House. He potentially torched a lot of his access, in the context of his own businesses like Tesla and SpaceX. SpaceX's biggest customer is the US government. So that's a big potential problem. I think it's interesting how he's crawled right back into his shell, Musk, and he's thus far been pretty apolitical, except for the Californian riots, where he's been retweeting what Trump and JD Vance have been saying. So I think Musk made a big mistake, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was intoxicated. I also thought the way that Trump dealt with him was really interesting. He was far less vicious and far more restrained until Musk started dropping the personal bombs on Trump, and then he just said, "Listen, if you want to get personal, we can get personal. Like, we don't need to do business with you. If you want to go down that route, that's an option."
But that's like the Iran trade. Like, you got 14 days.
Yeah. I mean, we'll do a deal.
He'll do an ultimatum.
Yeah, that's right.
To anyone.
Correct. Yeah, and JD Vance said, I thought it was really interesting. JD Vance said, "We love Elon. He's been great for us, but do you really want to get into a blood rivalry with Donald Trump at this point in his career? No, that's not the trade you want to do." And he was just like, get back into your box. I love Musk. I think he's amazing, and he's an extraordinary human being. He's done so much for society, but I think it was just a mistake. We all make mistakes, and I think Musk will iterate big time. So I expect Musk to come back out and swing strongly behind Trump in whatever ways he can in the future. There was also, I think Trump made the point that Musk was upset about him removing the electric vehicle subsidies by way of this big, bold, beautiful bill, whatever it's called, and whether that played part of it, I'm not sure. There was also, I think, issues with Musk dealing with the broader administration. It's one thing to have a bilateral relationship with Trump, but when you've got to deal with all of his lackeys, someone like Musk is going to blow up those guys because he's just,
personality-wise, for sure.
He's a force of nature. And but I'm disappointed, mate, because I thought Musk had a lot of answers to Trump's problems from a policy perspective. Like Musk has, really extraordinary strategic clarity. And he was right on the economics. You got to cut government spending in the US in order to balance the books, and you need to balance the budget in order to start paying back the debt and reducing the burden of the interest rate servicing costs. So yeah, it was disappointing.
I got Daniel Mookie coming next week. What would you say about the budget that came out for New South Wales on Tuesday this week?
Mookie's probably the best politician in Australia.
Definitely best treasurer.
Yeah, best treasurer in Australia.
Definitely best state treasurer.
Oh God, you're soft, mate. Come on. Mookie's definitely, I think he's the hardest working, smartest politician in the country. He is, formidably intelligent. What's different about Mookie as well? I think he really is in it for the right reasons. He doesn't want to be premier or prime minister. He cares about change, and he's also very sensible. I've dealt with him a lot. He's a fucking weapon, mate. He's an absolute beast. Mookie.
How much of that budget do you think was about saving or preserving our credit rating? For New South Wales, I'm talking about.
We think
it's a good look.
Yeah, we think they're at risk of losing the credit rating, but he's doing everything he can to try and salvage it. I can tell you this: the Victorians are borrowing about $40 billion a year. Queensland's borrowing about $40 billion a year. Mookie's only borrowing $24 billion a year
for a bigger state.
For a much bigger state, and so he's been incredibly disciplined on debt, and that's something I spoke to him a lot about before he became treasurer. He's an immense human being, and he's one of the good guys. Like if someone like him could become premier or prime minister, that's when you win. You know, when you've got somebody who's there for the right reasons, who isn't a narcissist, who isn't just trying to accumulate power and kind of settle scores, and then
that's how I see Chris Minns, by the way, at a state level.
Yeah,
he's not.
I like Minns.
I think Chris is in there for the right reasons. Sure, he doesn't get it right, but he's in there for the right reasons. He's not trying to settle scores. I think it's a bit different at the federal level, but I mean, anyway, I rate both.
I've only met him once, and I had like a meeting with Minns and Mookie, and Minns was fantastic.
Yeah.
He went to Princeton. He's a fireman.
Yeah.
Super impressive guy.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that
he's also normal.
And the fact that their relationship is sort of seem to be high fidelity is very positive.
One more question for you, Chris. So one of our listeners has asked us to ask you this question. Says from one of our Mental Plus subscribers, Aaron Scott. He says, "I'm here to hear Chris's thoughts about tax reform. We'd like to see lower income taxes and higher broad-based consumer tax, such as an increase in the GST." Or he says an increase in CGT. So I presume he could be meaning capital gains tax or the GST. But we do have a reform. We do have a summit coming up in August, I think it is. Question is, have they asked you to come along?
No.
And they haven't asked me either.
I'm not one of the good guys.
Nor am I.
One of Chalmers himself, or one of those guys, said a long time ago that dealing with me, you got to use fireproof gloves. So they don't trust me, and that's fine. I mean, I've got no problem with any of them. As I said, I'm pretty apolitical, but the problem is I say what I think, and I can't be controlled, and therefore,
well, you're not going to be controlled. Why would you?
Yeah, but I think to answer the question, I think everything's on the table: capital gains tax, discounts, capital gains tax period,
GST. He's made it pretty clear he won't do it.
I would just think that estate taxes, GST, capital gains taxes, mineral resource rent taxes, stamp duties, like state and federal taxes. I think it's all on the table because they're going to need to raise a lot of tax,
or that'll borrow more money, which is a problem.
Yeah. To pay the interest on the borrowings that they're building up. Yeah. So I think taxes are heading one way. And I think it's going to be really nasty, unfortunately. And I think this is over a 10, particularly if they get another 2 terms, you're going to see a huge increase in the public tax take to fund the NDIS. I mean, that's $60 billion a year, as big as Medicare. 1 in 9 kids are apparently autistic. It's the biggest fraud in the history of frauds. And
one of the reasons why I found it the other day is because if you're diagnosed and prescribed as autistic, and I don't mean severely autistic. I don't mean like completely different to everybody else, because there are autistic people and kids who are really at a disadvantage to some extent, and fair enough. But even if you're mildly autistic, however that it gets diagnosed, that they at the HSC they get special advantages in terms of how they do the exam. They get much more time.
Well, it's also assessed not by anyone who's independent of you, but by whomever you choose to have the assessment made by. And it's not means tested. So
clever parents will say, you better go and get that diagnosed.
Every man and their dog's now on the NDIS.
Yeah.
And so I think the taxes are heading one way. I mean, you're going to be paying a lot of tax to the government because the government's got to pay for the NDIS. They've got to pay for all this infrastructure. They've got to pay for the huge public service and the fact that they represent a larger share of the economy than any government we've seen since more or less World War II. So I think forget what they say. Like any claims that we're not going to do GST, we're not going to do estate taxes, I think it's all on the table. Maybe not this term, maybe next term, but it's they're coming for everybody. There's going to be a lot of tax paid. I mean, and you see the bifurcation here between libertarian states like Florida in the US and the super center left states like California. I mean, the totality of taxes you pay in California are 50 to 60%, where you're paying basically half that in Florida because they're just two distinctly different business models. And I think it also is unfortunately generational. Younger generations want government to solve their problems. Older generations want government to get out of the way. And
Have you got one quick one that just came through my mind? And let's forget about the unfairness of the total tax or the way it's been calculated, I should say. But this superannuation tax over $3 million, what's your view?
It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Like, I have no idea where this came from. It's not indexed. I mean, it just looks like an attempt.
Unrealised gains.
Unrealised gains. It looks like an attempt just to tax into oblivion anyone who has a large super balance.
But what would be the
presumably the intent is to get them out of super. But where's that money going to go? It's probably going to go back into the owner-occupied property, right? What are you going to do? You're going to take your $6 million in super and say, fine, I'm just going to upgrade to a bigger house and get tax-free capital gains on my home.
Maybe they got that lined up as well.
Well, wouldn't surprise me, mate. It would not. I mean, it's going to be nasty. It's going to be really bad.
This is terrible. But it's not here yet. We'll wait and see what happens in August or whenever he's having his meeting. And Treasurer, you should be inviting this bloke and a few other people that I know, but I doubt very much you're going to invite us. We'd at least tell you what you need to hear. We won't be there.
Can I say what we need to do is Australia needs to be a magnet for the best talent globally, and to do that, we need to have globally competitive tax rates, and we know we're close. Like we need to radically we should be less progressive in our tax regimes. It should be the tax scale should be much flatter, much lower. And but it'll happen. What's going to happen is we're going to have a couple of terms of this, and then there'll be big problems. But eventually, you'll get a Trumpian style character who'll just come in and he'll just slash all the taxes, and so the pendulum will swing in the other direction eventually.
Just got to stay alive long enough.
You got to stay alive long enough, yeah.
Thanks, mate. Good to see you again, Chris.